Why did the entire room go quiet the moment she walked in, like someone had pulled the air out of the briefing hall but forgotten to warn her? She could feel eyes shift, not directly, but in those flickers people make when they want to pretend they're not starring. She didn't look back. Not yet. The folder in her hand was still damp from the rain outside, rain she'd chosen to walk through even when a transport jeep offered her a ride. She needed the cold. She needed the quiet moments it forced into her head. And now here, among the rows of uniforms and stiff shoulders, it felt like the silence had followed her in. She didn't speak as she stepped to the side wall away from the main table. She'd never been invited to sit there anyway. There were rules, unwritten ones, about who earned those chairs and who was expected to observe without existence. She could feel something sticking slightly at her wrist, the leftover moisture from the soaked cuff of her sleeve. She pulled it up without thinking, just a reflex. But even that tiny motion made one of the aides turn his head. She didn't look at him. At the center of the table, Colonel Hadrick was flipping through a tablet, talking to two captains about route adjustments and supply delays. His voice had that dry authority that came from decades of never being questioned. His hair was gray not just from age but from sun and stress. His eyes didn't rise when she entered. Maybe he didn't notice. Maybe he noticed before she touched the door handle. No one could ever tell with him. And that was part of why everything that would happen later felt both inevitable and unbelievable. Someone near the projector whispered something under his breath. It wasn't her name. No one used her name when they thought she might hear. She didn't shift or acknowledge it. Her fingers found the edge of the folder and pressed just enough to remind herself it was still there. She had brought it because someone told her to. A transfer file, maybe. A report. She didn't ask why they needed her to carry it. She just carried what she was told. But the memory of earlier that morning still clung to her like the rain, the training yard, the metal bucket, the sound it made when water sloshed out and hit the gravel, the sharpness in the colonel's voice when he called her out in front of 36 recruits, though not with words meant for humiliation. Or maybe they were. It depended on how one replayed it. Some said he did it because she hadn't followed an order fast enough. Others whispered he was testing her. The truth sat somewhere she hadn't examined yet, because looking at it too long would mean accepting things she wasn't sure she wanted to understand. A hand tapped the screen at the front of the room. Maps shifted. Voices rose again, softer now, like everyone remembered they were supposed to be professional. She listened without staring directly. The operation had a name, every mission had one. This one sounded sterile, two English words glued together without emotion. It always amused her how something that could end, break, or save lives was wrapped in a phrase that could pass for a file label in an office. The doors closed behind her, though she hadn't heard them open. Two officers she'd never worked with passed by and didn't nod. Not out of disrespect, but because certain acknowledgments would raise questions they didn't want to answer. In this base, respect was often silent and selective. She glanced once at the glass windows lining the left wall. Past them, the training fields glistened under the lingering clouds. A few soldiers jogged in drab rain gear. One laughed at something someone said. It felt unreal that they could laugh right now, but then again, she understood. Humor was often the only place people hid without suspicion. Someone cleared their throat loudly and Colonel Hadrick finally looked up. Not at her. He was searching for a logistics officer who had just walked in. The colonel's eyes skimmed the room in a practice sweep. When they brushed over her, there was no twitch, no hint of recognition, just a pause too brief to call attention to. But she felt it. That split-second awareness that said he knew exactly where everyone stood, especially the ones pretending to disappear. Her shoulder tensed for half a breath. It relaxed the moment his attention moved on. The colonel's words resumed, pointed and economical. Numbers, schedules, routes, avoidance corridors, terrain blind spots, everything that might shape what came tomorrow or the next week. Why was she even here for this briefing? No one told her that either. She'd been summoned, that was all. Maybe to ensure the folder reached the table. Maybe to remind the staff that she still existed. Or maybe someone thought she should witness what would soon be asked of them all. She stared at the back of Captain Brenner's head as he studied a map. He trained under her once, years ago, before promotions pulled him away and memories blurred mutual respect into formality. He hadn't spoken a word to her since she transferred back months ago. They traded nods in passing, and once he'd opened his mouth to speak, then shut it again. Words died easily in places like this. The meeting dragged on. People scribbled notes. Others typed. A few whispered in low tones that fell apart as soon as they left their lips. The projector hummed, flickering from time to time like a dying firefly. And through all of it, she stood still, absorbing everything and looking like she absorbed nothing. What she remembered most, though, wasn't the colonel's voice or the maps. It was the moment his hand brushed the edge of a steel bucket early that morning before dawn. The same bucket that would spill water over her head, not to punish, not entirely, but to provoke something no one else could see. The sound of that water still echoed in her ears. Back then no one spoke after it happened. Not one recruit. Even the ground felt like it held its breath. She hadn't flinched when the cold hit her scalp or when it ran down the back of her neck like fingers made of ice. She just stood there, eyes locked on the colonel, while everyone else froze in confusion. And the colonel didn't apologize, didn't smirk, didn't explain. He just examined her as though the water were a lens and he wanted to see what surfaced. She remembered tightening her jaw, not out of anger but because anything softer might have shattered. And what stunned the recruits wasn't what he did, it was what she didn't. She didn't shout, didn't step away, didn't flinch. She blinked once slowly, like she had waited for that moment her entire life, and it finally arrived on time. Someone whispered her name then quietly, not loud enough for him to notice. But no one intervened. No one dared to ask why. And when he finally set the bucket down, she stood straighter. The moment stretched so long it could have snapped. Now back in the briefing room hours later, she exhaled a breath she didn't know she was holding. She shifted her weight from her left foot to her right. No one noticed. Or if they did, they pretended not to. Her hair, still slightly damp at the ends, clung to her collar. The scent of wet uniform and metal hadn't left her yet. Then the colonel said something unexpected. "We'll need a pilot for reconnaissance near the northern ridge." He didn't look at anyone in particular, but heads turned anyway. The northern ridge wasn't friendly terrain. There were rumors about old trails, rebel lookouts, collapsing rock beds, and other things no map could fully capture. No one volunteered, not immediately. She didn't move or speak. She kept her hands still at her sides. She knew better than to jump at something before it was handed to her. But the silence held a kind of question that lingered near her like a shadow, waiting for a name no one wanted to say. Across the room, Captain Brenner shifted in his chair. His boots scraped the floor softly, but she caught the sound. The colonel looked at him, then at another officer, and then his eyes flicked in her direction, just for a heartbeat. He didn't call her by name. He only said, "You'll be briefed separately on the flight plan." No explanation, no acknowledgement that she hadn't spoken. It was as if he had already decided hours ago. A murmur moved through the table. She felt the weight of unsaid questions pressing behind her, but she didn't step forward. She didn't nod. She remained where she was, as if confirmation came simply by her presence. She thought then, not about the flight or the ridge or the mission, but about the bucket, the cold, the way water felt like a question no one had the courage to ask out loud. She wondered if he'd seen something that she hadn't meant to reveal, something that belonged to a version of herself she rarely spoke to anymore. The folder in her hand had grown slightly heavier, though its contents didn't change. Maybe her grip had tightened. She loosened it and let the weight settle. Someone near the end of the table cleared his throat. "Sir, is that confirmed? For reconnaissance, I mean." The colonel didn't glance at the speaker. "Yes." The room seemed to fold around the single word. A sharp beep came from the wall screen, a reminder for the next segment of discussion. Everyone's attention broke away like a flock startled into flight. Papers shuffled. A timer clicked forward. Voices resumed, quieter than before. She lowered her gaze to the floor, but only for a moment. She had learned long ago that staring at anything too long made people think you were afraid of what came next. A captain at the far side of the room murmured, "I thought she was grounded last year." Someone else replied, "Grounded doesn't mean buried." They didn't know she heard. They didn't think she would react if she did. Grounded, the word had a sting she didn't show. There had been an incident, but not one she ever explained. Rumors filled the space where facts should have been, and maybe that was easier for everyone. People built stories to fill silence when the truth made them uncomfortable. She closed her eyes briefly, not enough for anyone to notice, and inhaled. The scent of dust, old carpet, and warm electronics filled her lungs. When she opened her eyes again, the colonel was looking directly at her. This time he didn't look away immediately. There was something in his gaze, a warning, a question, or maybe an unspoken acknowledgement of the morning. He tapped the table once. "That will be all for now," he said. Chairs moved. People gathered their things. Some left quickly. Others lingered in clusters. No one approached her. That was expected. She didn't wait for them to clear the room. She simply waited for the right moment to step forward and place the folder on the main desk without a sound. The colonel was still reviewing the map with two officers when she did. He didn't thank her. He didn't have to. She didn't want him to. She turned to leave when he spoke, barely above a murmur. "You start at 500 tomorrow." She stopped, not to react, but to acknowledge the words without granting them expression. He continued without looking up, "Don't be late." A dozen replies rose in her mind, none of which she spoke. Instead, she walked toward the exit, the wet cuff of her sleeve brushing against her palm. Behind her, conversations sparked back up like matches trying to stay lit in a breeze. As she stepped into the hallway, the lights flickered above her. The hum of generators echoed down the corridor. A soldier passing by snapped a quick salute, more out of reflex than recognition. She didn't return it, and he didn't seem offended. Outside, the sky had cleared slightly. The rain had thinned to a fine mist. The ground shone with fresh puddles, and the distant hills looked smudged like charcoal. She paused near the edge of the concrete path, her boots leaving faint impressions in the wet grit. What she hadn't told anyone, what no one had asked, was why she hadn't flinched when the water hit her that morning. Or why, despite everything that had been stripped from her reputation in whispers and sideways glances, she still walked back into rooms where she wasn't invited to sit. There were truths she kept like unfinished sentences, tucked behind the steady calm of her posture. She watched a vehicle rumble by, its tires hissing through shallow water. A group of recruits jogged past the far fence, their cadence low and uneven. One of them glanced her way and then quickly looked forward again. The wind picked up, threading cold fingers through the fabric of her jacket. She folded her arms, not to warm herself, but to feel something solid. The northern ridge, 500, another mission, another silence to walk through, and somewhere behind it the echo of water poured not to shame her, but to test whether the parts of her that once broke had learned to stay standing. She didn't smile, she didn't frown. She moved forward, each step quiet but deliberate, as if the ground itself listened. What no one realized yet, what no one was ready to understand, was that the bucket wasn't the beginning or the end. It was just the moment everyone finally looked her way, even if they pretended they didn't. And there was something she still hadn't told them, not yet. Who started the rumor that she'd failed her last flight, and why did people believe it so easily? The question trailed her steps long before dawn, long before the base lights flickered awake. She hadn't slept, not because she couldn't, but because something in her bones knew rest would only make her mind louder. So she sat on the edge of the narrow bunk in her quarters, boots already laced, jacket zipped, staring at the metal locker across from her as if it might open on its own and hand her the version of herself everyone kept guessing about. The clock on the wall clicked toward 4:30. Too early for voices in the hallway, too late for sleep to pretend it could help. She stood, grabbed the small duffel she'd packed hours before, and stepped into the corridor. The air smelled faintly of bleach and oil, two scents that never quite left military buildings, no matter how far from the city or desert they were built. Her footsteps didn't echo. She learned the art of walking like a shadow years before most recruits even knew how to lace a boot properly. Outside, the mist from last night's rain clung to the ground like breath on glass. The runway lights in the distance blinked lazily, tired from being awake before the sun. She passed two guards near the armory. One nodded, the other pretended not to recognize her. She didn't stop for either. The cold touched her face without asking permission, but she let it stay. Her flight gear hung in a locker inside the prep hangar. The metal door creaked when she opened it, not from neglect but because everything in this place carried the sound of use. She shrugged into the harness and checked every buckle twice. Her fingers moved with a discipline that didn't ask for applause or forgiveness. A mechanic glanced her way from across the hangar. A younger one, probably fresh from training elsewhere, maybe assigned here by accident or punishment. His eyes lingered long enough to wonder if he should offer help, but he looked away before making the mistake of asking a question she didn't need. The aircraft, a recon-modified TAC-47, sat under the open canopy with its nose angled slightly toward the dark horizon. Not sleek, not glamorous, but reliable. A machine built for eyes more than fire. She ran a hand along the side, feeling the cool metal under her gloves. Some pilots patted their birds like pets. She treated them like partners speaking a language no one else wanted to learn. At 4:55, footsteps approached behind her. She didn't have to turn to know it was him. Colonel Hadrick walked like someone who already knew where everyone else would be before they arrived. He stopped a few feet away, far enough to give the illusion of space, close enough to remind her he didn't need distance to maintain control. "You read the route," he said, not asking. "I did," she replied, voice steady. She didn't turn. He stepped to her right, his eyes scanning the aircraft as though he might spot an invisible flaw. "You'll have limited support on comms, terrain interference." She nodded once. "There's a watchpoint near the third ridge slope. Satellite scans missed a pocket there. You'll see it on approach." His tone was flat, but something underneath hinted that he expected her to notice details others might ignore. She adjusted a strap on her gear. "Alone." "For now," he paused, then added, "they'll monitor from ops. If something moves out there, they'll relay." She didn't respond. Alone was a word that didn't bother her, but it always made other people uncomfortable when they said it to her, like they were offering a warning instead of a fact. He studied her face briefly, his gaze never breaking into apology or explanation. "You know why you're on this." She met his eyes then, not to challenge him, but to see if he meant for her to answer. He didn't. He turned and walked back toward the building without another word. Not dismissal, just conclusion. She climbed the ladder and settled into the cockpit, the seat hugging her shoulders like memory. She ran through the pre-flight sequence with the same calm she'd used to fold a shirt. Every switch, every dial, every screen came alive in order. The engine hummed awake, low and obedient. Tower cleared her with a voice that hesitated on the last syllable of her call sign. She let it pass. The wheels rolled, the nose lifted, and the base shrank behind her without waving goodbye. Clouds hadn't fully broken apart yet, but the sky had a bruised blue tint that meant daylight waited just beyond the horizon. The ridge stretched ahead like a scar across the land, jagged and unapologetic. Wind nudged the wings but didn't challenge her control. At 6:10, the comm cracked in her ear, a static-laced voice. "Ops, 2 clicks east of your line, thermal scan flagged movement near grid H7. She angled slightly, eyes flicking between displays and terrain. The ground below was a mix of rock veins and forgotten trails. No roads, no markers. People only found places like this if they were hiding, hunting, or both. "Any confirmation?" she asked. "Negative, could be animals, could be." They didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need them to. As she guided lower, a memory from 3 years ago elbowed its way forward. Another flight, different terrain, same tension. She saw flashes, smoke plumes, silent comms, a name being shouted over a broken channel. They'd blamed her afterward. Not officially, not directly. But blame didn't always need paperwork to survive. She checked her instruments again. Nothing anomalous yet. The horizon darkened slightly near the ridge, as though the earth swallowed light unevenly. Ops spoke again. Telemetry's bridging out. You'll lose feed near the dip. I know, she said, though the person on the other end had no way of knowing. She remembered every dead zone on that map like scars on a surface you couldn't sand smooth. The dip appeared, a crescent carve in the terrain, impossible to see from ground level. She held altitude briefly, then banked in a slow arc. Her mind didn't race, it calculated. That's when she saw it. A flicker of reflected metal, half covered beneath a net of brush and dirt. Too still to be accidental, too intentional to be civilian. She didn't speak yet. She hovered in a short pass, instruments silent, breath controlled. Ops crackled back in. Signal jump, what are you seeing? She didn't answer immediately. She tilted left, sunlight catching the edge of the hidden object just enough to confirm it wasn't debris. Not new, not old, placed. She exhaled once before replying, unmarked cover. Possible weapon stash or personnel blind. Coordinates. She gave them without checking notes. The silence that followed from Ops wasn't surprise. It was tension wearing a headset. They asked the question they were supposed to. Return or hold pattern. She looked again at the ridge, at the stillness that pretended not to breathe. Holding. She circled once more, eyeing something they couldn't see from screens. Tracks. Faint but fresh. Tire impressions, light but deliberate, running parallel to the slope. Whoever had been here didn't expect eyes in the sky yet. A second memory tried to surface then. This one a debrief years ago. Voices behind a closed door talking about her judgment, her choices, their fear of assigning her command again. She blinked it away, but not in anger, just acknowledgement. Ops came back faintly. Ground unit ETA 40 minutes. Too slow, she thought, but she didn't say it. She angled higher, keeping the sight in range while avoiding a direct overhead pass. Her fingers relaxed on the controls, though every sense remained alert. And then, just as she was about to make another sweep, a voice she hadn't heard in 2 years broke through the static. Call sign Razor 21, this is Obsidian. Do you copy? Her breath stalled, not visibly, not audibly, but in that quiet place where thoughts hesitate. No one used that name anymore. Not for her, not for anyone. It had been buried with an operation that never made it to the record. The comm crackled again. Razor 21 confirm receipt. She didn't respond right away. Her eyes narrowed, not in confusion but in recognition that hadn't been invited. She adjusted altitude, scanning the ridge again. Then she pressed one finger lightly to the comm. Obsidian state source. Silence, then a low voice. Didn't expect you back in the air. She didn't let emotion enter her tone. You're not on this channel. Neither are you, technically. She checked her display. No crosslink, no piggyback indicators. Whoever it was knew how to slip between frequencies like a ghost threading wire. What do you want? She asked. A soft chuckle barely there. Same thing you want, to finish what was interrupted. Her jaw tensed, but she didn't break her posture. The hidden ridge, the stash, the old call sign, it formed a line she didn't like the shape of. Ops came back on the main channel, oblivious. Recon, confirmed status. You've drifted 30 meters west. She didn't answer them yet. Her eyes were on the ground. Someone was down there, maybe more than one, waiting or running or watching her watch them. She spoke again into the uninvited frequency. If you're back, you're either desperate or reckless. But he, if it was the same voice she remembered, only murmured. Or maybe this time, no one poured water just to see who flinched. The line cut. She didn't curse. She didn't react. She simply steadied the glide and fed coordinates back to Ops like nothing bled through the airwaves. "Adjusting position," she said. "Copy," Ops replied. "Ground team en route, secure and observe." She banked once more, the sunlight now lifting fully over the ridge, casting long shadows across the rock. And for the first time in a long while, something in her chest didn't tighten, it braced. Because this wasn't just recon anymore. This was something crawling out of the past with dirt still under its nails. And there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. Who else knew that call sign still belonged to her, and how long had they been waiting to use it? The thought followed her down through the thinning cloud line as she adjusted course, the ridge stretching beneath like the spine of something ancient and restless. She didn't let her breathing change. The aircraft responded to her hands as if it trusted her more than the people still debating her existence behind closed doors. Ops tried again to reach her with routine updates, but their voices felt distant, almost irrelevant. Her focus had locked onto the ground, the stretch of brush camouflaging metal, the faint tire tracks, the uncanny stillness around the site. Anyone hiding in that kind of silence wasn't afraid. They were either confident or cornered, and both could be lethal. The sun inched higher, just enough to outline the edges of the slope in sharp, uneven shapes. From this height, the world below looked harmless. She knew better than to believe it. As she banked left for another sweep, a memory slid into her mind uninvited. A tent lit by a failing lantern. Reports scattered across a table. Voices arguing about extraction windows. And over it all, someone saying her name the way people do when they're not sure if it's praise or accusation. That mission had been shut down before it finished breathing. Files sealed, debriefs scrubbed, soldiers reassigned or discharged. One went missing. One stopped speaking. And she was grounded. But the voice that called her Razor 2-1 hadn't disappeared like the rest. It had waited. She skimmed the ridge again, slowing enough to capture footage on her secondary recorder. The cover net, the position of rock piles, the way the dirt was disturbed in a line leading north. It wasn't random. It was preparation disguised as ruin. A flicker on the corner of her display caught her eye. Motion. Small, fast, gone as soon as she registered it. Could have been wildlife. Could have been a scope catching light. Ops buzzed in again. "Recon asset ping telemetry, you're drifting elevation." She answered flatly, "Intentional." They hesitated. She could hear someone in the background covering their mic to discuss whether to press further. They didn't. She held the advantage of being where they were. She angled the aircraft higher and leveled out briefly. A shadow flitted across the stones far below, long, narrow, angled wrong for the sun's position. Not an animal, not a trick of light. Someone was moving. She didn't report it yet. Instead, she switched to the encrypted frequency the old team once used, a channel that hadn't been activated in years. She didn't speak, only listened. Static whispered, then cleared for half a second as if someone exhaled into the silence. Nothing more. Her mind flicked back to Obsidian's voice. Calm, too calm, like somebody who already accepted whatever consequence came next and still chose to walk toward it. On the main channel, Ops finally said, "Ground team is 23 minutes out. They're requesting updated visuals." She didn't reply with words. She dropped altitude just enough to grab another pass over the stash, keeping the aircraft high enough to avoid small arms fire but low enough to catch details. A tarp edge had shifted since her first sighting. Someone had touched it. "Ops recon confirm." She gave her report in pieces. "Cover is active. Tracks extend northeast. Movement probable. Recommend reroute of approach or delay insertion." There was a pause too long, too careful before they said, "Command wants you to maintain observation but not engage. Hold until ground contact arrives." She almost laughed, but didn't let it reach her face. Observation was easy when you were the only one looking. Harder when the ground planned to erase its own footprints. She scanned the horizon again. Nothing moved. The calm was too absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. A rusted memory surfaced, kneeling in another aircraft's cockpit years ago, staring at the comms system after the blackout, waiting for a voice that never returned. The operation had gone dark without warning. They told her later it was a systems failure. She knew better. People failed before machines did. A soft click in her headset snapped her back. Obsidian again, quieter this time. "You're early." She didn't waste time. "You compromised that site." "No," he said, unbothered. "I'm watching who does." "Why use that channel?" "So you'd listen." She steadied her tone. "Where are you?" "If I tell you," he said, "you'll tell them." "I don't report ghosts." A pause, faint wind over the line. Then, "They think the ridge is just a waypoint. It is. It's bait." She glanced down at the stash again. "Whose?" "That's the wrong question." She hated riddles in combat. "Then give me the right one." He didn't answer. The channel went dead. She switched back to ops. "Increase perimeter watch at ridge crest. Blind angles near the slope are compromised." They hesitated, then asked source. She lied tersely. "Thermal blink and shift patterns on second pass." They bought it, or pretended they did. She adjusted course again, this time widening the circle to trace the land beyond the ridge. The northern stretch opened into a basin carved by wind and time. Sparse trees, dry gullies, just enough shadow to hide a convoy. And there, just beyond a fault line in the soil, more tracks. Wider, deeper, vehicle weight, recent. Ops notified her ground team ETA had dropped to 18 minutes, still too slow. Dawn light had fully breached the sky now, and shadows shifted into clarity. The ridge wasn't sleeping. It was listening. As she passed over the crest, something metallic flashed again. But this time it wasn't from the stash. It was higher up, near the ridge spine, angled with precision. A scope. She broke line of sight instantly, pulling a shallow climb. Not evasive, not panicked, just surgical. Whoever held that scope had glass on her but didn't fire, seeing, not striking. That was worse. She steadied at a safer altitude. Ops asked what caused the altitude spike. She said, updraft, and they accepted it because they wanted to. Another memory surfaced, uninvited but sharp. Her stepping out of a hangar years ago, boots still wet with hydraulic fluid, when two officers intercepted her with clipped words and clipped orders. They'd told her she was being reassigned. They didn't tell her why. She never asked. Silence had a way of protecting more than questions did. Now the silence below the ridge felt familiar. Not emptiness, anticipation. She circled wider and keyed into a secondary surveillance mode. The onboard scanner flickered, then picked up a faint electromagnetic disruption. Jammer tech. Not military standard. Not local rebel either. Something repurposed, old but modified. Someone down there knew how to hide from eyes above. Ops came through again, irritation creeping in. "Recon, your path doesn't match your flight plan." She kept her tone level, adjusting to terrain anomalies. "Command says stay on prebriefed pattern." "Command doesn't see what I see." They didn't like that. She heard it in the tight silence. She cut them off before they could argue. "If you want ground team walking into a blind pocket, hold me to the pattern. Otherwise, let me finish the sweep." Someone in ops muted their mic and argued with someone else. She caught fragments: past record, can't disregard, command liability. Then the channel opened again. "Continue," they said stiffly. "Monitor and report, no engagement." She didn't respond with acknowledgement. The aircraft dipped into another arc. Another voice from memory came uninvited. Someone from the old squad calling her by her first name only once, in a moment where everything else was noise and smoke. She hadn't heard her name spoken like that since. On the ground below, something shifted in the brush, small, like a hand or boot pressing into dirt. She caught it through the scope overlay but didn't zoom in. A zoom would reveal her intent and they'd vanish. She let the aircraft drift just enough to pretend disinterest. Then she saw it, a glint of fabric under stone, a sleeve, someone lying prone, watching, not alone. They weren't guarding the stash, they were using it. Ops cracked in. Ground team is rerouting based on your last mark, ETA 15 minutes. Too late, she thought again. She hovered near the edge of sensor range and watched the ridge as if it might speak. The air around her felt tighter, the kind of stillness that came before a trigger pull. Obsidian's voice came back once more, softer now. They're not looking for what's buried, they're waiting for who comes to claim it. She kept her eyes on the terrain, and who is that? But the channel emptied again. She thought briefly of stepping out of the cockpit, of feeling earth under her boots instead of metal beneath her hands. But that wasn't her place today. Not yet. Ops told her to hold for visual support. She leveled the aircraft and shut off the external lights. The sun rose behind her, casting her shadow long and thin across the ridge like a warning. Someone down there saw it. She knew, even without eyes on them. And as the ground team inched closer to danger they didn't understand, she realized the ridge wasn't just part of the mission. It was part of something that hadn't died when they told her career had. There was still something she hadn't told them, not yet. Who decided that silence was the best way to bury a past operation, and did they really believe it would stay dead forever? The question hovered at the back of her mind as the aircraft maintained its path above the ridge, engines steady, instruments clean, horizon widening with every heartbeat. The world below looked still, but she could feel it, tension coiled beneath the sand and stone, waiting for the wrong footstep to wake it. The ground team was 12 minutes out when Ops relayed a final route adjustment. Their voices carried the false calm of people who believed proximity equaled control. They spoke in clipped updates, but she heard what they didn't say. No drone backup, no secondary overwatch, no contingency plan if the ridge bit back. She angled slightly west and killed her speed just enough to hover along the shadowline of the slope. Every instinct she had, the ones they'd tried to stamp out with paperwork and half-truths years ago, was screaming that the ground wasn't just occupied, it was listening. She switched to thermal, scanning the ridge in slow, calculated sweeps. Heat signatures dotted the terrain, some faint, some pulsing with rhythmic breaths, not scattered like scavengers, positioned, watching, waiting. She marked the coordinates silently, not broadcasting them yet. Ops would demand confirmation, and confirmation would cost time, time they didn't have. A voice crackled through the main channel, startled and low. Ground team lead. Recon, eyes on ridge. We're seeing no movement. You sure about the stash? She didn't respond immediately. She zoomed farther north, her gut pulling her toward a rock formation that looked too deliberate to be natural. A slab of slate angled over a hollow, tracks leading in, none leading out. Finally she said, "You're looking in the wrong place." They hesitated. "Then where should we?" "Hold position. Do not advance beyond marker Delta 4. Someone on their end cursed under their breath, not muted enough. "We're almost at the rise." Command said push to vantage. She cut in, sharp but calm. "You walk past Delta 4, you won't be seen again." Ops broke in before the ground lead could argue. "Recon, clarify threat." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You're not deploying into an abandoned drop site. You're walking into a perimeter designed to look deserted." Ops paused and she could hear keys tapping, maps shifting, someone scrambling to adjust their assessment. Then, threat level. She eyed the ridge, catching another glint, metal against stone shifting slightly. At least 6 embedded, possibly 10, mixed spacing, camouflaged, one high-angle overwatch. Ground team's line stayed open, but silence replaced objections. The reality of an unseen enemy always closed mouths faster than rank could. Ops finally said, "Hold observation. We'll redirect team to secondary approach." She didn't answer. She was already adjusting altitude, widening her orbit to triangulate positions with movement bleed-off and shadow displacement. Her mind cataloged without hesitation entry points, probable lines of fire, thermal dead spots. Then something she hadn't seen before came into view. Northeast of the stash site, halfway up a jagged escarpment, a sliver of canvas camo broke its contour, barely visible unless the light hit it just right. Underneath, movement, two figures, unmoving except for the slight shift of shoulders with breath. Snipers, spotters, both. She marked it mentally, not verbally. Speaking too soon would spook everyone, enemy and allied alike. Instead, she banked once more, like a vulture pretending disinterest. Her headset buzzed again. Ops, recon confirm new contacts. Stand by. She heard mutters. They hated that phrase. Meant she was choosing what to share and when. Meant she was thinking, not obeying. She switched briefly to the old encrypted channel. Static greeted her. No voice. No trace of obsidian. Whoever he was, he'd gone silent the second she started closing the distance on the problem. That wasn't abandonment, that was strategy. She returned to main comm. Divert ground team south. Keep them 80 meters off ridge face. There's a long-range pair at the mid-slope. They're glassing your approach. Ground lead whispered something she didn't catch. Ops relayed orders. Sudden rustling and hushed curses told her the ground team now believed her. She didn't get satisfaction from it, just confirmation that things were as bad as they felt. Then, a tremor of motion, small, near the lowest edge of the stash cover, a hand brief as a blink adjusting something under the netting. She zoomed, couldn't see the face, only the sleeve faded, no insignia, the type worn by people who didn't want to be classified when found. Ops broke in. Command wants current estimation of intent. They're not guarding equipment, she said. They're waiting to see who comes for it. Ops paused, meaning the stash isn't theirs, it's bait. The channel filled with silence thick enough to taste. She angled north again, widening out, trying to see what they expected to draw in. Supply convoy, patrol drone, ground sweep. No, something bigger, something they knew command couldn't ignore. Her eyes tracked the rise, the crest shadow, the blind gullies below. Then she saw what they were waiting for. On the eastern edge of the basin, hidden in the folds of terrain, a convoy crept into view, two transports, one escort. No lights, no comm signatures, moving like they thought terrain was their shield. They weren't headed to the base. They were headed to the ridge. Her stomach didn't drop. Her pulse didn't spike. But something inside her shifted with certainty. This wasn't coincidence. Someone had fed them routes. Someone knew the ground team would move and the convoy would follow. Ops shouted into comms now, voices overlapping. Recon confirm convoy identity. IFF. Repeat, do you have ID? No tags, she said. Not ours, not local militia. Armed? Yes. How many? Enough. She killed external comms and opened encrypted band again. This time, Obsidian didn't wait for her. You see them now, he said quietly, not gloating, not surprised. Who are they coming for? Not you. That confirmed too much, and nothing all at once. And the unit on the ridge, she asked. They're here for whoever survives. She didn't react. How long have you known? Long enough to know command will blame the wrong side, again. She watched the convoy creep along the basin edge, patient and sure. You waited for me to see it. You were always going to, he said. Even when they tried to bury you, you were the only one who kept looking at the dirt. She didn't ask how he'd found her. She didn't ask why he broke silence now. That could come later, if later still existed. She rejoined main comm. Ground team must pull back now. Ops argued. Command says maintain shadow until they'll die, she said flatly, cutting across them, before they get eyes on either side. Ground team lead spoke up, voice strained. Recon, extract or hold. She scanned the ridge a final time, then the convoy. And in that moment, she realized something worse than ambushes and buried ops. This wasn't an accident, and it wasn't just conflict. It was cleanup. Someone wanted bodies on both sides. Someone wanted a narrative that required no questions. She answered the ground lead without hesitation. You pull back south and you do it now. No engagement, no observation, disappear. Ops barked contradicting orders, but she spoke over them with a calm that didn't waver. If your team stays, they'll be the first bodies pinned to someone else's story. Ground lead hesitated only a breath before saying, "Copy that. Moving." Ops tried to override, but the call had been made and boots were moving. The channel flooded with static and clipped orders. She circled again, watching the ridge, the stash, the sleepers under stone, the convoy closing the gap, the sky bruising into full light. And beneath all of it, she could feel that same buried past starting to claw upward, the one they'd tried to drown in silence and paperwork. Someone would want answers soon. Someone would want blame assigned and motives buried. And when that moment came, there was something she still hadn't told them. Not yet. Who gave the convoy their route, and who told the ridge team exactly where to wait for them? The question pressed into her mind like a fingerprint on glass, visible only if you knew where to look. From above, the land looked calm, but calm meant nothing here. Calm was the mask danger wore before it bared its teeth. She adjusted the aircraft's arc again, widening her view of both the convoy and the hidden positions along the ridge. Ground team chatter had thinned to short, urgent movements. She could hear the strain in their breathing as they withdrew south in staggered silence. They trusted her word now, or maybe they only trusted survival more than orders. Ops tried to regain control of the situation with clipped commands and rising panic they couldn't hide. Recon, relay ground position. They've deviated from authorized path. Confirm their movement. They're maneuvering out of crossfire, she said, steady. Or would you rather write letters to 6 families by sundown? Ops went quiet for half a second, long enough for truth to sting, not long enough for regret to land. The convoy crawled forward like a slow infection, wheels carving through the loose soil without leaving panic in their wake. No markings, no flags, no escort drones. They moved like people who knew no one would interrupt them. She pinged their heat signatures, 12 men, possibly 15. One vehicle heavier, communications maybe, or munitions. Their spacing wasn't sloppy, they had discipline. This wasn't a rogue cell, it was an assignment. Her gaze drifted back to the ridge. The Overwatch pair she'd spotted earlier remained still. No radio flickers, no visible signaling. They didn't need to coordinate. Everyone here already knew their role. Ops came back trying to sound composed. Command requests full threat breakdown. Identify probable intent. They're not passing through, she said. They're arriving. Arriving for what? She scanned the rock line, the camo-stuffed blind pockets, the silent watchers. To watch something die. Ops bristled. Your role is reconnaissance, not interpretation. Provide specifics. She ignored the reprimand. Ground team clear yet. A beat, then the ground lead responded, breath controlled. South ridge line, 40 meters below tree break, holding. Good, at least they were out of the kill box for now. The convoy dipped slightly behind an embankment, then straightened as though following a path etched into memory. They knew every turn, every dip, every blind zone. That meant someone had given them maps, or someone had walked that land before. She swept thermal again. The stash, the ridge sleepers, the Overwatch, none flinched at the convoy's approach. No rise of weapons, no shifting, no warning signals. They were allies, or at least coordinated players in a larger game. And command had them walking right into it without a clue. She keyed back into the encrypted channel one more time. No greeting, just intent. You still watching? Obsidian's voice emerged like breath across coals. You thinking about choosing a side this time? There are no sides here, she said, just outcomes. A short silence. You're not wrong. She glanced down again. They're not reacting to the convoy. Either they expected it or they orchestrated it. Maybe both, he murmured. Maybe someone up the chain wanted observers and scapegoats. She didn't waste time. What happened to the last operation, the one they sealed, the one they used to bury us? He let the pause linger. Same kind of ridge, same kind of silence, same kind of miscommunication on the record. She remembered the aftermath like a wound she couldn't find but still felt bleeding. They didn't fire her. They erased the parts of her that made questions dangerous. And when rumors started, she stayed silent because silence kept her in the air. Now, watching the convoy align with the ridge like puzzle pieces falling into place, she knew this wasn't coincidence. This was a pattern resurfacing. Ops came through again. Recon, hold position. Command is coordinating a follow force before repositioning ground team for observation. She almost barked a laugh. You send anyone within 50 meters of that basin, you'll be recovering tags, not personnel. Stand by, Ops snapped. She cut them off. You stand by, you still think this is surveillance, not setup. A harsh breath crackled over the comm. Someone else took over the channel, a voice she recognized from years of political briefings and sanitized debriefs. Lieutenant, they used her old rank deliberately. You are to maintain air pattern and wait for instruction. Do not interfere with ground operations. She didn't bother reminding them she'd been promoted before they stripped her command rights quietly. She didn't argue rank. Rank meant nothing in a fight no one else understood. Instead, she asked, who gave them the route? Silence. She pressed harder. If they didn't pull that path from recon intel, they got it from inside command. Are you willing to swear that didn't happen? The voice returned, lower, tighter. Do not speculate. So she stopped speaking. She repositioned the aircraft, silent, sliding along the top line of the ridge without sending a single signal flare of intent. The convoy reached its midpoint. Engines hummed steady and certain. No fear, no hesitation. And then movement. Not from the ridge, from the convoy itself. A rear transport door slid open, and two figures stepped out, one with a case slung over their shoulder, the other scanning the ridge with binoculars that reflected the dawn like flame. They weren't here to fight. They were here to negotiate. With who? A rustle of commotion broke through the ops channel as someone finally realized this wasn't a routine intercept. Ground lead whispered, they're not expecting us, they're expecting someone else. She confirmed, and the team on the ridge isn't here for them, they're here to clean up whoever comes late. It clicked then, not in words but in weight. This wasn't a mission gone wrong. This was a controlled burn. Someone drew in a convoy. Someone positioned a kill group. Someone set command on a collision course with a false objective. And whoever orchestrated it thought no one would see the pattern. She stayed with the thought only a moment longer before the next one pushed forward. If she'd been sent here to witness this, they expected her silence again. But something old in her, older than shame, older than forced obedience, had started moving the second Obsidian spoke her forgotten call sign. She angled the aircraft, killing her altitude until she skimmed the ridge crest, shadows stretching across the rocks like a blade. Overwatch took notice this time. A head lifted, a rifle shifted, but no one fired. Ops hissed in her ear, panicking now. Recon, maintain protocol, do not alter course, do not. She muted them. Calm static vanished like breath on glass. Her world shrank to instrument lights, horizon line, and the slow crawl of danger below. Someone had written a script and expected everyone to play their part, but scripts only worked when no one changed their lines. And she was done being quiet so someone else could stay clean. She lowered one notch more, every movement intentional. Convoy engines rumbled louder, ridge watchers shifted, ground teams stayed hidden where she pushed them. And in the space between those moving pieces, she finally understood. What was buried wasn't just a mission. It was a truth someone planned to kill twice. And before anyone else claimed the story, there was something she was finally ready to reveal, not yet out loud but soon. Who would believe her if she spoke now, and who had already decided she wouldn't survive to tell it? The thought slid under her ribs as the aircraft's shadow cut across the ridge like a blade. Below, the convoy slowed, engines idling low. On the rocks above, the watchers shifted imperceptibly, adjusting angles, checking wind, fingers grazing triggers but not yet committing. Everyone in that basin was waiting for a signal. Everyone but her. She kept the TAC-47 at a shallow hover just above the sound threshold of small arms, hands steady on the controls. Her muted comm hissed quietly, a reminder of the voices she'd cut off. She hadn't turned it back on. Not yet. The ground team was safe, crouched under a tree break where she'd pushed them, hearts hammering but alive. For now. The convoy's rear door opened wider. A third figure stepped out, taller, face obscured by a scarf. They weren't armed, at least not visibly. They carried a slim case, both hands gripping it like an offering. One of the Overwatch snipers on the ridge flicked their barrel once, a signal she'd seen before in places she'd been told never existed. Not a command to fire, a command to hold. This wasn't a raid. This was a meeting, a trade. And she, up in the air with her silent recorder running, was the only uninvited witness. She zoomed in on the case. No markings. Could be tech, could be samples, could be proof. She felt the old knot in her chest tighten, the same knot that had pulled tight on a different ridge, a different operation, years ago when her call sign had first been used like a leash. Her thumb hovered over the comm switch. She could break radio silence, flood ops with everything she was seeing, force command to acknowledge the setup before it happened. But she pictured their faces, the paperwork, the quiet internal investigation that would follow. They'd bury the evidence, bury her, and tell the world a different story. Again. She steadied her breathing. Not yet. Obsidian's voice ghosted back into her head. Maybe this time, no one poured water just to see who flinched. She had stood there, soaked and silent, because she'd known even then that reaction was what they wanted. Not now. Not this time. On the ground, one of the convoy guards stepped forward, raising a gloved hand toward the ridge. Not waving. Signaling. A low whistle cut the air, so faint she felt it more than heard it. The watchers on the rocks shifted again. She saw the faint glint of optics swinging toward a southern approach, exactly where command had wanted to send the ground team. They'd have been dead already if she hadn't moved them. Her stomach hardened into ice. This wasn't just a trade. It was a staged engagement, a slaughter designed to catch the wrong uniforms in the wrong place at the wrong time. A single gunshot, a staged provocation, and command would have a headline and a pretext. She flipped on the recorder's secondary channel. Not to transmit, just to create a duplicate log hidden deep in the TAC-47 systems. One no one in ops could erase remotely. Insurance. Then she keyed the encrypted channel. Obsidian. Static, then I'm here. They're about to light a match, she said. They want a fire big enough to hide everything else, he replied. Who's pulling their strings? Higher than you think, he said quietly. Lower than you'd hope. She angled the aircraft slightly north, forcing the sun at her back, lens flare blinding anyone trying to scope her. You planning to stop it? Silence. Then, I'm planning to live long enough to see who runs when it burns. Her jaw set. I'm not letting my team get burned for a story. Then you'd better move now, he murmured, because they're about to start. Below, the scarfed figure raised the case higher. Another glint on the ridge, scope turning, not at the convoy but at the empty space where a ground team should have been. A trigger finger tensed. She flicked her comm back on, her voice like ice. Ground team, break cover and pull 200 meters south immediately. Do not stop. Ops erupted in her ear. Lieutenant, what are you doing? Maintain radio silence. She cut across them. They're setting you up. Move your people now. Ground lead didn't hesitate. Copy, moving. She dove the TAC 47 5 meters lower, enough to draw every eye upward. A decoy, a noise, a shadow too loud to ignore. The ridge reacted instantly. Scopes swung toward her, muzzles lifted, calculations redrawn. Someone below shouted. The convoy paused, the case lowered. She banked hard, rotor wash kicking dust across the rocks, breaking sight lines. Through the corner of her eye, she saw the ground team melt deeper into cover, sliding down into a dry gully like water escaping a cracked jar. Ops screamed in her ear about disobedience, about command authority, about court-martial. She muted them again. She didn't have time for their script. A shot cracked from the ridge, not at her, at the convoy. Chaos bloomed. Guards swung rifles. Someone in the transport fired back blind. The scarfed figure ducked, clutching the case to their chest. Another shot. Another. She saw one of the ridge watchers roll back, hit. The kill box had turned on itself. This wasn't a meeting anymore. It was a fuse lit both ends. She steadied the TAC 47 above the churn, recording everything. She could see command's narrative already. An unauthorized exchange intercepted. Casualties on both sides. No one to blame but the ghosts who'd warned them. Another burst of fire. A convoy guard fell. The second Overwatch scrambled for cover, dragging a wounded partner. The case dropped, skidding across rock, landing halfway between convoy and ridge. She angled lower just enough to catch a clear image of the case. Its latch had cracked. Inside, something glinted metallic, slim, curved, unmistakable. A data core. The kind used to transport black file caches. Proof. She exhaled slowly. The kind of exhale that steadied hands before they moved. On the ground, the firefight stuttered into a lull, everyone realizing at the same moment they were shooting at the wrong target, but too deep in to pull back. Dust rose in pale curtains. Shouts echoed off stone. A wounded man crawled behind a transport wheel. Another dragged a rifle away from a fallen comrade. She saw the ground team's position in her mind's eye, safe, still unseen. For now. But if the firefight spilled wider, even that gully wouldn't hold. She toggled the encrypted channel once more. Obsidian, you still in play. A pause, closer than you think. Then help me end this before they bury it. He didn't laugh this time. You were always better at endings. Below, one of the convoy drivers climbed back into the cab, engine roaring. They were trying to pull out, but the path was blocked by their own fallen. She thought of the bucket of water again, the cold shock, the silence. A test, always a test, but maybe it hadn't been about obedience. Maybe it had been about this moment, whether she would still stand still while someone else wrote the story. Her thumb hovered over the weapon's toggle. She didn't want to fire. She didn't want to kill. But she wanted a line drawn, something that said enough. Instead, she reached for the external PA, flipped it live, and spoke for the first time in hours, her voice amplified across the ridge and basin. Cease fire. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a plea. It was a command, flat and resonant, echoing off rock. For one strange heartbeat, everyone froze. Rifles hesitated, dust hung. Then a single shot rang out, cracking the pause. And she understood she'd just stepped out of the shadows. The story was hers now, whether she survived to tell it or not. Below, the case still lay in the dirt, glinting in the sun. Proof that someone had built this moment piece by piece. Proof that could save her people or damn them. She steadied the aircraft one more time, eyes on the case, mind already moving 3 steps ahead. Because there was something she hadn't told them, something no one else had dared to put on record. And now it was too late to stay silent. Who fired that last shot and who wanted it heard more than felt? The echo of it clung to the ridge like smoke, thin but deliberate. No one moved for 3 long breaths. Dust hung midair. The case glinted in the open like a coin tossed to fate. She kept the TAC-47 hovering low enough to cast shadow, high enough to keep every rifle guessing. Her voice still hung in the air from that single order, cease fire. The silence that followed hadn't been obedience. It had been calculation. The convoy's lead guard crouched behind a wheel well, eyes cutting up toward her aircraft, then back to the ridge. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of killing the wrong person in the wrong moment and answering to the wrong superior. On the ridge, the Overwatch team remained prone, one injured, one torn between defending position and disappearing entirely. The shot came from neither of them. She tracked the echo. It came from the lower slope, someone she hadn't marked, someone who hadn't fired until the silence risked exposing intent. She scanned the basin, her instruments reading heat pockets like shallow breaths. The firefight had only lasted seconds, but the setup had taken months. Someone had drawn every line and placed every piece exactly where they wanted the blood to dry. She flipped open comms again, but not for ops. Ground team, hold your position. Do not reveal, do not engage. A low breath came back. Copy, we're unseen. Good, they needed to stay that way. Ops crackled in then, their panic straining through an attempt at command posture. Lieutenant, why was live fire initiated? Provide immediate combat assessment. She didn't dignify that with a direct answer. Hostile engagement is internal. Our personnel are out of sight. Any movement toward the ridge will result in casualties we can't claim or justify. Ops tried to argue. Another voice broke in over them. Higher rank, colder tone. Someone from command who'd been dragged in by the chaos. State current visual. She glanced down again. Convoy is stalled, 2 hostiles down, 1 wounded on ridge. Unknown third shooter at slope level. Fire exchange ceased. And your team? Unaffected. But if you move them back in, you'll give whoever planned this the bodies they need. Ops started to object. She muted them mid-sentence. They had already proven they weren't listening. The case still lay between the 2 factions, dust coating its metal edge. Too valuable to abandon, too dangerous to rush. She knew the men below could read that truth as clearly as she did. A flicker of motion on the eastern ridge face snapped her focus. Someone crawling, not ridge watchers, not convoy. A third presence she hadn't tagged, ghosting across shale with practiced stealth. She tracked their path, moving toward the case, not the fight. Obsidian. She didn't call out, didn't acknowledge him on comms. She simply angled the aircraft lower, blades chopping the air with deliberate threat. Not at him, at everyone else. The convoy guards tensed. One raised his rifle halfway, aiming at the ridge slope. The Overwatch pair shifted, scope seeking the shadow climbing toward the prize. The unknown shooter at the lower slope rotated their aim, trying to find a target no brief had prepared them for. Obsidian was almost at the case now, still unseen by most, because he knew where not to cast a shadow. He waited until the wind shifted, until dust masked him, until the TAC-47's hum drew just enough eyes away. Then he moved. He didn't grab the case. He kicked dirt over it, half burying the latch in seconds, disguising it like debris. Anyone looking from above would miss it entirely. Anyone looking from the ground would need minutes they didn't have to recover it. She realized then, he wasn't here to take proof. He was here to keep it from being used by anyone else. She switched back to the encrypted frequency, speaking without whisper or flare. You covering tracks or erasing them? Obsidian's voice came soft, wind-streaked. You don't burn secrets, you starve them of oxygen. She knew what he meant. If no one could prove what was in that case, the only story left standing would be the one written later, the wrong one. Someone will retrieve it, she said. Not if they're too busy surviving something louder. As if cued, engines roared. One of the convoy vehicles lurched backward, tires kicking shale. The ridge overwatch tensed. The hidden third shooter shifted for angle. She saw the fracture point coming, the moment one stray bullet would ignite the rest. She did something then no protocol could justify. She dropped the TAC-40 7.6 meters in a single tilt and fired two 20 flare rounds, one into the dirt behind the convoy, one into the ridge face above the overwatch. They weren't explosives, they were noise and light and shock, a warning drawn in molten color. Shouts erupted, rifles swung but no one fired. For 3 breaths everyone thought someone else had triggered the sky. Obsidian vanished into the dip behind the ridge crest, gone like smoke under wind. The case lay buried enough to blend, half swallowed by the earth. She rose altitude again, before anyone could aim with intention. Ops finally broke through her mute with a roar. "Lieutenant, you discharged munitions without clearance. State your objective." She could have lied, could have apologized, could have claimed misfire. She didn't. "If I hadn't, you'd be counting corpses right now that don't belong to this battlefield." They barked something about arrest, about grounding her, about ignoring orders. She cut them out again. Her eyes tracked the convoy. They were revering now, fast, deciding retreat was cheaper than certainty. Good, one less wild card. The Overwatch abandoned their nests, dragging the wounded, disappearing into the breaks in the stone. Their setup was blown. Good, let them run. Only the buried case remained, alive and waiting. She hovered above the shifting silence, her recorder still running, her own reflection faint in the cockpit glass. She knew command would demand answers she wouldn't give the way they wanted. She knew ops would pin blame where it was convenient. But she also knew something had shifted in the dirt below, just enough to expose the shape of the lie. There was one more thing left to do before she extracted. One thing no one else would even think to attempt. And whatever came after, she wouldn't be silent again. Not about this, not about the buried file, not about the ridge they thought she wouldn't see twice. And especially not about the truth she'd kept locked behind obedience. Because there was something she was done holding back. Not yet spoken aloud, but very, very close. Who would reach that buried case first if she didn't, and how far would they go to erase it once it was in their hands? The question settled into her blood as she pulled the TAC-47 into a slow, circling hold above the scarred basin. The convoy was gone now, retreating fast enough to convince themselves it was tactical, not panicked. The ridge watchers had melted into their fallback cuts, hauling the wounded without looking back. The unseen third shooter was silent. The gunfire was over, but the danger was. The case lay half swallowed by dust and stone, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. She had seen where it fell. She had watched Obsidian kick sand over it like he was marking a grave. He hadn't hidden it for himself. He'd hidden it from whoever came next. Ops hammered her calm again, voices overlapping, rage and fear masquerading as authority. They had no visual. They had no grasp. They wanted status reports, detainments, clarity, anything they could twist into containment. She left them in mute purgatory and focused on the ground. "Ground team," she said quietly into their direct line, "sound off." The reply came hushed, controlled. "All accounted, 0 wounded, holding position per your last." She could hear their restraint, questions unsaid, adrenaline grinding under discipline. "Maintain silent cover. You're not exfiltrating yet." A pause, then, understood, awaiting vector. They trusted her now more than command, more than the operation. That alone meant someone would come for her when this was done. She checked fuel, enough for extraction and return, enough for one more risk. She angled lower, not a landing, just a threat. The downdraft scattered dust across the ridgeline. Anyone still watching knew she wasn't leaving yet. The encrypted frequency clicked open again, without her touching it. Obsidian, voice steady, almost amused. "You going down there yourself?" She kept her eyes on the case's burial spot. You wanted it hidden. I want it out. You planning to broadcast what's in it? No, she said. I'm planning to keep it from whoever hired the shooters. A low exhale, not quite a laugh. There's more in that box than names and dates. You open it, you invite ghosts back to dinner. They were never gone, she said. He didn't argue. You walk into that basin and someone will decide you were part of the deal, or the reason it went bad. I don't need to walk in. Her tone didn't rise or fall. I just need it secured before command lies about what was lost. You think they'll let you turn it in? No, she said again. I'm not turning it in. This time silence lingered. Then, you going off-grid? Not yet. He seemed to weigh that, then said only, clock's ticking. A flicker on her display, thermal pulse, faint, moving slow along the basin fringe. Not her ground team, not the convoy, not the overwatch. Someone scavenging. She dropped altitude in a smooth, shallow glide. Not a dive, not aggression, just claim. The figure at the basin fringe froze, half-crouched by a rock shelf. They hadn't seen the case. They were searching blind, maybe sent by whoever orchestrated this to retrieve what hadn't burned. The TAC-47 shadow swallowed them whole. They bolted. One sprinted step, then another, then vanished into a fissure before she could tag a face or mark an insignia. They'd report back that the sky still had eyes. That alone bought minutes. She set the aircraft into hover directly above the hidden case. Dust whirled under the rotors, thinning the cover of dirt just enough for her to glimpse the metal edge again. The comm flashed, ops overriding mute on priority channel. Lieutenant, you will clear the AO immediately and return to base. This is not a request. She didn't bother answering them. Instead, she spoke only to the ground team. Sending coordinates. You'll approach low and silent. Recover a buried object the size of a field case. No lights, no chatter. The ground lead hesitated only once. Hostiles still in area. Yes. Friendly cover. My eyes no more. Understood. She heard motion, boots shifting, weapons checked, breath steadied. Ops shrieked in her ear again. Something about insubordination, about standing down. She cut the channel entirely. If they wanted to drag her into tribunal later, they'd have to survive the truth first. She sank the aircraft 3 meters lower. Rotor wash peeled away more dust, sketching the outline of the case in shifting earth, close enough for a person to reach if they moved fast and low. The ground team emerged from the tree break like ghosts cut from shadow. 4 figures, no wasted movement. They moved in a crescent, the point man sliding forward flat to the ground. He saw the edge, brushed the sand away with his forearm, looked up once, as if verifying the sky still watched, then lifted the case free. Weight surprised him. It showed in the slight shift of his stance. He didn't open it. He didn't ask. He signaled extraction route with a tilt of his head, and the others flanked him as they retreated into cover. On the ridge, the Overwatch didn't fire. They'd lost initiative and surprise. The convoy was gone. The deal was ashes. The only currency left was survival. She climbed back to safe altitude, tracking the team's movement by heat and shadow alone. When they reached the gully, she switched to their private line. You don't open that case, she said quietly. You don't turn it in. You don't mention it until I tell you who's listening. Ground lead's voice came back steady. Where do we take it? She thought of the base, of the command offices, of the men who'd buried her record years ago, the ones who'd send a retrieval squad before the case hit a table. Nowhere near headquarters, she said. Ops burst back onto every open channel. Lieutenant, you are ordered to divert to command post immediately. Your clearance is suspended. You will power down and stand by for escort. She didn't touch the comm. Instead, she spoke to the man with the case. There's an old survey station west of the low ridge near the dried stream bed. No comm towers, No cameras, take it there. Wait. Ground lead hesitated only a second. And you? I'll take the heat first. They moved. She banked the TAC-47 toward home, slow, visible, alone. Bait, this time of her own making. Ops hurled legal threats and directives. She let the noise wash past. She wasn't thinking about tribunals or rank or repercussions. She was thinking about a bucket of cold water and the way she'd stood still as it hit. Everyone thought the shock was the test. They were wrong. The test was what she'd do the next time someone tried to choose her silence for her. The base came into view, buildings squared against the light, antennas piercing the sky like needles. She eased the TAC-47 onto approach and keyed comms only long enough to say one thing. If they try to intercept my team, she said, I'll open the case myself in the command hangar. She didn't wait for the backlash. She descended. And somewhere behind her, in a dry gully with a buried secret, and 4 soldiers who'd stopped doubting her, a truth waited like something that no longer needed permission to breathe. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.